right now we'd like to welcome Michelle Barron, who is a candidate for the District 211 School Board, and Kim Cattell, I hope I'm saying that right.
Kim Cavill.
I'm sorry. She's secretary, right, of the school board at this time. So she's in the program. She's in the fight. And I've been to a couple of the meetings, Kim, maybe 3, and always interesting, always learn something. And there's a lot that we would like to learn this evening. So I'm going to start with you, if that's okay, Kim, since you are involved already.
Sure.
So I never even knew what a school board was until I met Joy Slavic and joined Northwest Suburban Organizing for Action very deeply, being head with Stand With Women. I didn't know much about school boards at all. And now I'm going to them, I see that there's a lot that's discussed. Why did you want to be part of the school board?
So I ran and was elected in the spring of 2019. So the election was in April of 2019. Campaigning. Is everybody okay hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Campaigns for these seats really start around like January. So it was that winter into spring that I put my hat in the ring to run. I will say, like most, statistically, we know that women and female identified people usually need to be asked repetitively to run for any sort of office. That was certainly true for me. I was asked by lots and lots of people in the community to step up. I wouldn't have done so, if I had just a single issue or a hobby horse to run. I don't think that, that makes effective school board governance. And so I ended up running, and I wanted to run because I care very deeply about our public schools in particular. I am a certified teacher myself. So I graduated from Iowa State University in 2003 as a secondary English teacher, so certified 6 through 12. And I went into education, not just because my talents inclined me that way, but because a teacher in my high school career made a really big difference in my life and inspired me to do the same. So I moved overseas and I got another degree in disability studies. I really enjoy working with people with disabilities. So I've consistently done that now for quite a long time. And because of all of that work in many different aspects of education, community-based education, working in the public school system and some private schools in various countries around the world, leads me to be very fiercely protective of our public schools here in the United States and, of course, in my home state here of Illinois. So I am an employee of District 15, which is an elementary feeder district of 211. I'm also a parent of 2 children who attend that district and who will be attending Palatine High School, which is one of the high schools under the District 211 umbrella. So it matters to me very deeply as an employee, of course, and as a parent, and then therefore as a school board member. I'm passionate about our schools because, particularly here in the United States, they really represent the first point of many different types of care for a lot of our students. For a lot of our students, it's where they get their most reliable meal. Many of the students that I work with, for example, don't just receive educational services, but they receive occupational therapy services, social work services, psychology services, physical therapy services, vision screenings, et cetera. Our schools, in my mind, are our community's most critical infrastructure. And I think the COVID pandemic really highlighted how much of that is true, not just for our promise as communities to care for the young people who live in them and our children and our families, but also for parenting adults and families. And so, the fact that schools run and provide services also is an economic driver of wealth generation in communities that allows people, women in particular, and mothering people to work. Again, tension that we saw highlighted during the pandemic. So it's all to say that schools are really critical infrastructure. They're the lifeblood of our community, and every bit of energy that you invest and money that you invest into young people repays itself, down the line in terms of policy, many times over. So that's why I decided to run. I care very deeply about public education, what it means for our children, what it means for our families, what it means for our parents, and what it means for our community and staff.
So the school board for the high school district, there are 5 high schools, is that right?
Well, so we have Schaumburg, Fremd, Hoffman Estates, Conant, Palatine High School. We also have the Alternative Learning Academy, North Campus, Kirk Minor School. So we have 5 main high schools, but we have other buildings and we have many other programs that are run through the schoolhouses. Not to mention that our schools are largely open 6 days a week from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. at night. And that's obviously much longer than the school day because our facilities are used by our, this is just a small example. I mean, this is a really big district, but our facilities are used by adult education opportunities. That's something that if you live in our area, you might have recently gotten a flyer about. We provide GED recovery programs. We provide, English instruction as an example, but we also provide like Learn to Knit, which I love to knit. So I highly encourage everybody to learn to knit. I often think that whenever you're tempted to write something on Facebook, log off and pick up your knitting needles instead. And at least at the end of that, you have a hat to keep yourself warm rather than a whole host of anger and emotional upset. So we offer a lot of different things, but that means our buildings are deeply connected to the community, and that's in traditional and non-traditional ways.
It's Joyce.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry I'm late. I'm just coming back from a meeting. I'm in my car and I just wanted to make sure I hop on and say that, Kim Cavill is an absolute community treasure and we need to make sure that she gets elected.
Well, thank you, but I appreciate that, Joyce. I'm happy to be here. I'm always happy to talk about why school boards matter and why public education matters.
So as part of the school board or the school board entity itself, it seemed like when I would go to the meetings, there were a lot of topics that were discussed. And is there a lot of, do you get a lot of information ahead of time, a lot of things that you have to peruse through, discussions that you have with people before decisions are made?
Yes and no. It's a balancing act. So I like to tell anybody who's ever interested in running for the board, it's important to know what you're committing to. I mean, the way I was raised, you never commit to doing a job unless you're going to do it right and you're going to do 100% of that job. So as part of the commitment to being a school board member, it is expected that you do your homework, and that homework really represents reading your board reports. Here in our district, I'm not sure how it works on other boards with other districts, but generally speaking, we always get a weekly report that's generally delivered on Fridays, and that board members are expected to read that report. And I would say on average it's about 10 pages or so, with not counting supplementary materials. So you are expected to read your weekly board report. You're certainly expected to check your board email regularly to make sure you're staying on top of whatever is being communicated about, and that you're aware of any emails that the superintendent or administrative team are sending back and forth to you, as well as constituent emails. So there's a daily commitment to that. And then before each meeting, our meetings are generally once a month, every once in a while, or for special projects like the hiring of a new superintendent, which I was a part of. We certainly had many more frequent meetings than just once a month, but generally, certainly open meetings are at least once a month. And those meetings work best if you read through your board materials before you attend the board meeting. So those materials are available usually the weekend before, and certainly to the public, so days before. And it is part of our board agreements to do your homework and read all of those materials. And if you've ever looked at Board Docs, which is a software that catalogs the board meeting agendas, the policies, et cetera, and the associated supplementary materials, that's quite a lot of documentation to get through. But if you do your homework, that you have that opportunity to ask clarifying questions of the superintendent or the relevant administrative member beforehand, which can streamline the meeting. So you're not essentially wasting time, all, for example, asking variations of the same question.
Right.
You can get clarification beforehand and be prepared for the meeting if you wanted to bring up a topic for future discussion, et cetera. It's a matter of courtesy. Now, there are certainly phone calls back and forth with various members of the administration. Board members sometimes call one another for various logistical things. But generally speaking, and here I can only speak for myself, I certainly can't represent the board as a whole. In terms of discussion about issues coming before the board, not just Open Meetings Act laws, but I think the spirit in which those laws were written, which is school boards serve to be an organization that I think should be as transparent with the community as possible in order to respect the trust that parents and families and community members demonstrate when paying their tax bill and sending their children to us, that we should be open and transparent with the business that affects those students and affects those taxpayers. So discussion about issues coming before the board for votes, those are reserved for open meetings where they can happen in front of the public, of course, subject to various laws. I mean, there are some subjects that must be spoken about in closed session to protect various kinds of confidentiality, et cetera. But business in general, as much business as possible, should be conducted in open session in front of the community for transparency's sake and as a sign of respect, in my opinion. So I hope that answers your question. I know it seemed, it was a little long-winded, but it's the honest answer. There's a lot of documentation to get through if you're going to do your job properly.
Do you have direct contact with parents? Or like if a parent has a question, or I've been to a couple meetings where, you did not respond at that moment and they were told there would be not a response. Do you sometimes go back then and send an email or touch base with people that have concerns?
Sure. I know public comment can be strange and frustrating for members of the public. I was on that side of school board meetings quite a bit before I decided to run. It's important to understand that board members it's not a dialogue, and that's not for the board members, sake. That's really for the public's sake. The public should be afforded every opportunity to speak unencumbered.
Nice.
And without fear of having an argument. Everybody should be able to have their full say. And that's what those rules of decorum at public comment try to ensure, that everybody gets their full say. And yes, there's always a member of our administrator team at the board table. It's usually Kurt Tenneper, who will accept phone numbers, email addresses, whatever contact information members of the public who want a response can turn in. And so there have certainly been many occasions where after the meeting has concluded, I have retrieved those contact details from Mr. Tenneper and then reached out to that parent or that person directly after the meeting to have a discussion or to see if I can direct them to the appropriate source of information to solve their problem. And I know that other members of the board and administration have done the same thing.
I'm going to make sure people who have questions will have that opportunity, Kim, but I have one question. It's a combination. What maybe are you most proud of with the school board since you've been involved? And maybe is there any concern that you have, maybe after COVID or that is more prevalent now?
Let's see, it's very difficult for me to choose something that I'm proudest of. I would say in terms of whole board unity on our particular board, that's difficult to find. It's increasingly rare that all 7 of us find common ground on many issues. That's okay. That's fine. That's why there are 7 members. And at the end of the day, it comes down to votes. But I will say that this year in particular, we have all managed to find common ground on issues associated with school safety in particular. Regardless of our political ideology or affiliation, should any of us individually have those, I am very proud of the way that our board has worked with the administration and with one another to tackle that issue. So that's the thing I'm proudest about, because school safety is important to all of us, and we worked really hard on coming together as a board and doing everything that we could. So the thing that I'm most concerned about is actually related to that issue. When thinking about, so I work in a school, my children go to school, I live in this country like everybody else. And I think regardless of anybody's personal or political feelings about firearms and guns, I think we all reckon with the fact that it's scary, the gun violence that we see in the news, and particularly the escalation of gun violence related to children in schools. It's scary. It's scary for us as a country and as a people and as a community. And in dealing with school safety, to try and keep students as safe as possible, that has necessitated the schoolhouse to be much more inaccessible than it has been in decades past. So, if I think about, I'm 41, and I think about what school looked like when I attended, there. And my school was very different. I went to high school downstate in a much smaller community. So, we only had 110 people in our graduating class. I mean, it's a much smaller school than anything at District 211. That being said, we didn't have to do any lockdown drills. We didn't have to do any of that. We have the idea of having an armed police officer or an SRO permanently on our presence. Nobody had even dreamed that such a thing would be appropriate or necessary. But not just that. I mean, if I had forgotten my lunch, my mother could have walked right in, not even just the front door, walked right into a door of my high school and either found my classroom or gone to the office and handed the lunch without a visitor's badge and anything else. And that's just not possible anymore, because we're trying to keep students safe. And so because we've had to make the physical schoolhouse, and therefore our children's schoolhouse, where our own children attend, inaccessible in order to preserve their safety, that means that it feels much more difficult, I think, for parents and caring adults and community members to connect to that schoolhouse. And so I feel like the challenge that, I wrestled with the decision about whether or not to run for another term. I'm not going to pretend it's been easy. It's not easy service regardless, but this is something in particular I feel really passionate about, is finding ways of restoring that kind of connection while preserving the safety of our students. And I think that that's a challenge, but it's one that is important to me, and I think really needs addressing. When you have that level of disconnect, I think that breeds distrust, or it creates ground for other people to distrust where none need to exist. And we also know that for people's mental health, not just students, but their families and parents and communities in general, the more we're connected to one another, the less isolated we feel, the better we do, and not just face-to-face connection, like face-to-face connection, not just virtual connection. And so anything that the schoolhouse can do to reaffirm and reconnect those, to rebuild those connections while preserving student safety, I think is a really interesting challenge for boards to tackle.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have a question for Kim? You want to put it in the chat or unmute yourself and ask her?
I opened my chat window here. I said, yes, duck and cover drills. I remember speaking to my mother about those. Yes. I talked to my mom about those. I remember the strange, I mean, the strangest one that I remember experiencing, but it wasn't really strange because of the drill itself. It was just strange because in our school, it was an old building, and we had to do of course, the tornado drill, right? And we had to do the tornado drill, which is just another variation of duck and cover. But I remember at one point, they thought we should put we should do the tornado drill, not in the hallway, which is where we'd always done it, but we should be in like I'm going to say like the basement of the school where like the heat ducting and the water piping was. It's a room that none of us had ever seen before. And I just remember being down there and thinking like, I would rather be in the hallway. This feels really strange. Yeah, it was dark and weird down there. So like, that was my version of duck and cover. It's like, no, thank you. So examples. So the question I see in the chat box, do you have any examples of how community can be brought back into contact with the school while still preserving safety? I think it would be great if we could have so this is something I've been thinking a lot about so the way a lot of teachers make it easier to communicate with parents, we have a lot of digital tools, right? Like we have websites like we have all sorts of things, like Google Classroom would be like a really common example. And we've got like the student readiness plan and all kinds of digital tools that students have to, and parents and families have to use to navigate digital life and their classrooms and their academic career in our schools. I think it would be really great for teachers, as an example, to not just post information like text summaries of what's been going on in the class as an update. So my children being in elementary school, I oftentimes get like a weekly newsletter. Here's what we were doing in social studies, et cetera. I think it would be great if staff were encouraged to do that via video from their actual classroom. I know this might sound small, but I think it's actually a big thing to be able to see a teacher and to be able to see the classroom on, even if it's a video and you're not physically there, but to be able to see the classroom where your child spends a good portion of their time feels comforting and reassuring to parents and families, and to help feel more connected to that classroom and that teacher. So it's not just a text blurb in your email that you're having to cycle through like all the other thousands of emails that we get through the week. So I think using video for staff updates would be really great. I think, we brought back some activity fairs at some of our high schools this year, which I think were wildly successful and were really important. Open house, I think, is really great. I see somebody talk about that in the chat. We always have like a freshman night where freshmen and their parents can walk through their freshman schedule. I think that should be available for all students, not just freshmen. We've got big buildings and you get a new schedule every semester. And I think that it would be helpful for all parents to be able to walk their kids' schedule, not just freshmen. And that would, again, respect that connection and rebuild that connection. So those are just things off the top of my head. There's lots of things that I've been thinking about. Somebody says, I love going to open house. I do too. Tracy Coleman asks, how should the district board handle parent requests to change curriculum materials? So I think I want to say it was July. It was certainly around that time of 2022, a meeting around that time. It's worth going back and looking at the video of the board meeting. Around that time, the board had a fairly lengthy discussion about the process in place for parents and caring adults who wanted to raise concerns about curriculum. From memory, that's a 6-step process, and the board members certainly had a debate about whether that was too many steps or too few, too complex a process, to not. Like, it's a balancing. And we had different views, obviously, between members about what the sweet spot should be. That process, as a result of that discussion, I believe remained in place. But there is an established process for parents and caring adults to go through to raise concerns that starts kind of at the bottom and works its way up. So, first point of call is actually talking to the teacher, and if that isn't satisfactory, there's talking to I believe it's the department chair is the next person. So there's a series of steps which involve a review of the curriculum material in question. And at every step, there is a chance for a amicable resolution or a resolution of some kind to be reached. And at the end of that process, if there's no resolution, then it does eventually reach the purview of the board. And of course, reasonable people can disagree on how many steps there should or shouldn't be in that process. I think it's important just in general to remember that boards are really meant to speak as a group through policy, and that if we set a precedent that individual board members can stick their nose in and interfere in that process, it undermines the administration, but I believe it undermines the parent too, who has the chance to speak to the administration, multiple members of the administration before they get to the board. And, when we imagine, a lot of times when we imagine like, oh, if only this board member, because I really like this board member, and if only they could intervene and just change this for me, I'd be really happy. It's like, right. But if you set that precedent that this board member can change that for you, you're setting the precedent that a board member who disagrees with you can do the same. And then where are we? We're not in a place where anybody's really agreeing, and we're in a place where we're using our students against one another to achieve adult-oriented goals. And I don't think that that's fair to our students, and I don't think that's what school board members should really be doing. So, reasonable people can certainly disagree on how lengthy that process should be, but there is a process in place. And I think that we should give the established process in our district a chance to work when parents raise concerns. Go ahead. Yeah.
Michelle Barron, who is our next speaker, she's got to leave at 7:45. I'm wondering, Michelle, if maybe we could just have you introduce yourself. We would love to have you back. You could come even next month, not a problem. But if that's okay, Kim, maybe let her.
Oh, absolutely.
I didn't why she wants to run for this.
It's important to hear. So I actually have to duck out anyway, because I've got my little ones here at home. So I'm going to duck out if that's okay. But I thank you for the invitation, everybody. And of course, you'll be in good hands here with Michelle. I had the pleasure of meeting her, and she's wonderful to talk to. So have a good rest of your evening. You have my contact information if you need to reach out to me again.
Thank you, Kim. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Bye. Thank you.